My name is Edward Mermelstein. I am a principal at Rheem Bell Mermelstein. I've been practicing law for the last 17 years. I have also been in the real estate profession for over 20 years, both in the capacity as owner, manager, as well as, in certain cases, brokerage, commercial, as well as residential. Well, an off-market deal has many misconceptions shrouding it, and one of which is that you can get an off-market transaction at a lower price than you typically would pay for a transaction that's on the market. Off-market transactions tend to come from anyone associated with a property, whether it's a broker, an owner, a attorney that represents the owner. So off-market transactions are not necessarily transactions that will save you money, but will provide you a entry into a situation that will lead to less competition. Well, off-market deals will come in many different variations. Certain off-market deals are there simply because the owner does not want anybody to know that they're selling a property. So they'll test the market by going to certain brokers or going to their attorneys or friends and saying, I'm thinking about selling a property. What are your thoughts? And the feedback typically revolves around the fact that somebody who is looking to be in a situation where they don't want either competitors or friends or family or even the newspapers knowing that they're looking to sell something. So it's a way to do something very quietly, but not necessarily at a lower price than it would normally get on the market. Well, in today's world, off-market transactions typically mean that you're going to be paying either market value or above market value, and that's simply for the fact that pricing in a market that is on the upswing tends to dictate where the final sales price is going to be. So today, most property owners are not going to start a off-market deal without an expectation that they will get at least what the market is paying for this type of property, or even higher than what the market would pay. And again, that is a premium associated with exclusivity. It's a premium associated with the fact that you're not going to have competition for the deal. And in many cases, especially when it's a Class A property, there's great value associated with not having it go to all the brokers or all the buyers of whether it's a city or a state or a country. So that's it's a good place to be if you can afford to pay the market price for the property. The exclusivity that you're given when a property is off market in certain cases means that you have extra time to do your due diligence, but that is also the other side of the situation is that the owner may say, well, before I put this property onto the market, you have 2 weeks or 30 days to make your decision. So sometimes the flip side is that you may have less time as a result of the fact that somebody's giving you only a certain period of time before they do go to the market. And again, that usually is associated with a relationship that you may have, whether it's with the owner, the broker, or the attorney, a friendly relationship where they know that you have high certainty to close, provides you a free look, for lack of a better description, of a property that normally you would need to enter a contract with and put down money deposit. Off-market transactions tend to be friendlier transactions. Again, those are based on the fact that there is a relationship. Typically, you're known as someone who can close, or you're a friend, or you have prior business dealings with the person who's selling. And we've seen these types of transactions get completed very quickly in certain cases, where someone doesn't want the property to go to the open market because they've been told that you have a certain period of time to do it. So the fact that you can't close within, whether it's a week or 2 weeks, is very important. And typically the seller is aware of that. There typically are no shortcuts for these types of situations. I would say that anyone who's looking to be in the New York real estate world has to expect that they will need to spend quite a bit of time building relationships and getting to know the real estate world of whichever market they're practicing in. So the first thing you need to do is have expectations that this is going to be a long-term commitment. It's very rare that you'll find situations where a broker or a buyer gets a off-market transaction when they're first starting out. That's very much atypical. The more likely the scenario is that you're working with someone who is very experienced, whether it's a broker, an attorney, or a buyer, and the fact that you're partnered up in that way with somebody who has a reputation in the market increases your chances of getting an off-market transaction. So if we're talking about partnering up with a buyer who has a high certainty of closing, that's very important to a seller. And if you can convince somebody to come into a deal with you because you have access to something that someone may not have access to, you're normally more than several steps ahead. Now, in return, you're going to have to give up more than you would normally have to give up if you didn't need a partner. So brokers that are starting out, or attorneys that are starting out in this business that want this type of exclusivity should try to build relationships ahead of time, and also build an understanding ahead of time, where if they do find a transaction that does make sense, what typically that would look like. So you want to have your deal points in advance to some degree, and every deal is going to stand on its own, but if you can get at least a global idea of how you would proceed in a certain situation, that would make the transaction go much quicker. And again, certainty of closing is very important to a seller, so you want to present yourself in such a way where there are no questions from the seller, that you can complete the transaction timely and without any serious questions. Typically, when you're walking into an off-market deal, what I would say is have all of your ducks lined up in a row, and make sure that any question that's thrown at you, you have an answer for, because if you don't, then the likelihood that you're going to be taken seriously by the seller is much less, and they'll go to the next person. I find that those that are proactive tend to do the best in this business. So my recommendation is try to attend as many industry events as you can in the beginning, just to understand who the players are, start building relationships, find the people with the best reputation in the business and learn from them. Try to either volunteer and work with those that have been around for a long time and have a strong reputation in the business. So even though you may not be making money in the first 6 months or for the first year, the experience that you get from working with a professional that has done many deals or has a very strong reputation in the business will far outweigh the fact that you've foregone a salary for that period of time. Well, if you have an interest in a certain type of deal or a certain type of property, what I would say is put in the time and get as much homework done before you jump into it. So if you're looking at either a specific market or a specific property, try to find out as much as you can about the property or the location, and going to an owner or a broker with the fact that you know as much as they do, or in certain cases more about their own property, gives them a strong sense of comfort that it's likely that you're serious, and it's likely that you can complete the transaction as a result of having all this information in front of you. And that also helps build the relationship and creates that comfort zone that you need to create with somebody who may not know you in the beginning. The more you can give feedback about a property or a location to the person sitting across from you, the more comfortable they're going to be with you. Again, these types of situations are usually built on relationships, and many of the times that I've seen off-market transactions take place, they'll take place without any documents having been signed other than the contract to purchase the property. But to do it right, I always recommend to try to get a non-disclosure agreement signed that gives comfort level to the seller and or the party that's across the table from you. If you volunteer that you'll sign whatever document needs to be signed in order to protect the person on the other side of the transaction from worrying about that their personal financial information is going to be disclosed, that comfort level is very important. So if you can get that out of the way quickly, that typically alleviates some concerns. And then the other document that typically you would want to have signed once you do have a buyer is some sort of a brokerage agreement or a non-circumvention agreement if you have an owner that doesn't want to necessarily negotiate a commission before they're even ready to sell. So the non-circumvention agreement will typically protect you, where the owner is not going to go around you to your buyer without negotiating a commission with you. We've done more than a few off-market transactions, and one of the more typical ones has to do with, again, relationships. And sometimes off-market transactions are simply transactions that were listed for quite a long period of time, and for some reason the owner decided to take it off the market to either reprice it or take care of certain due diligence items so that they can put it back on the market. But typically, our off-market transactions have taken place due to personal relationships with whether it's the brokers or the sellers, and they know us. They've done business with us before in some fashion, And that aspect of it is very important because you want to make sure that whoever's sitting on the other side of the table from you has a comfort level knowing that, one, you're not going to take advantage of the situation, and two, knowing that you're going to complete the deal in a timely fashion. Because the worst thing that can happen for a seller is that they enter into a contract that's going to lead to a protracted closing or worse, litigation. So those are always concerns of a seller, and they typically will shy away from somebody who's willing to pay a little bit more, even though they don't know him or her. So sellers sometimes will take a lower price simply because they know the buyer on the other side, and they know that they're going to be able to close. So in terms of specific transactions, we've done multiple off-market transactions, and more so these days with residential properties than with commercial properties. Again, that's simply a factor of there being very strong relationships between commercial sellers and brokers and attorneys. So the contacts between all those parties tend to create a situation where there are just less off-market transactions. Now, with respect to off-market transactions in the residential world, it's a little bit different, simply because if you have a relationship with an owner, the off-market situation gets created in terms of timing between the time that a property hits the market and before that time. There is typically anywhere from a few days to a few weeks that developers will contact the people that they're most comfortable with and say to them, we have these properties that are going to be sold on the market in the next 2-3 weeks. If you have a client that's interested, please bring them in the next week or two before the whole world knows about it. So that's, I would say, more typical today. And in a market such as New York, which is a very unique market, having the ability to bring your client to a very desirable new development creates a very unique situation, because it gives them the opportunity to pick units that will be sold right away, or pick units that will tend to go up in price very quickly. So there's a great value associated with being able to sell or show residential properties to a buyer that wants to have that first look. And that's in today's New York market is something that I would say has a great value. Anyone who's looking to concentrate on off-market deals should expect that this is a long-term venture and is built around relationships, and is something that they need to partner up with someone who has a strong reputation in the business, and patience is very important when it comes to off-market transactions.